All right. So again, welcome for sure. And we've got quite a few people online, including a couple of the board members are online. So I wanted to start with this slide tonight. We sent out cards. Micah has his version of it somewhere handy. If you didn't get one, we sent them to all the post office boxes. It's online. We asked that you turn that data in to us in November, sorry. If you haven't done it yet, please do it anyway. Ultimately, what that data is being used for is, as we do a design, right, we need to know how deep do sewer mains have to be. And so telling us where your septic tank is, back of the house, front of the house, side of the house, we can do some better estimates. And the more data points we get, the better the design will be, and therefore the more accurate the costs will be. So roughly 100 people sent us online, or I got a lot of them via mail as well. So thank you to those 100 plus that sent something. But if you haven't done it, it's not too late. I was telling one of your fellow residents here a few minutes ago, the county, we've asked for all the records from the county as well. The county's records are a little mixed up in as much as they shifted systems during COVID. And so things that have happened since that period, they've got it all in their nice new system. The older stuff is a little less clear. And one of the local folks that does septic pumping was not real good about turning in reports on a regular basis. And so if you were using that particular company, I'll leave them nameless, your record may be at the county or may not have made it to the county. So we're going to get all the information we can. Again, it ultimately helps us put together the best possible design we possibly can, which ultimately means, you know, better estimates as far as what it'll cost all of us who live in the district. Some folks don't know who's on the board, so I threw this slide in here tonight. Julie Kennedy is our current president. Her term is up in 2026. Lisa Palmer, Greg Parks, their terms are both up in 2026. The two Toms, Tom Fairham and Tom Nelson, are both in terms that end in 2028. If you know those folks, you know, they all live throughout the township here. By all means, grab them and ask them questions. They love it. If you've been to one of these before, you know that I also like to start with some questions. I won't necessarily answer them right this second, but if you have a question that you said, this is the one question I want to make sure I get answered, I'll happily write it down. Usually there's a couple that people are just burning to know. What's this? What's that? If you've got one of those, I'll happily scribble it down and make sure I cover it. If I don't hit it during the presentation, I'll hit it at the end. Anybody, any takers on that one? Jordan.
What's your best estimate for when the vote will happen?
What's the what?
Best estimate for when the vote will happen?
When for the vote?
Yes.
All right. I'll give you that one in just a minute.
How many votes do you need?
Okay, I'm just gonna call out percentage of votes. And I'll talk about that one. Please.
Why is the Williams company in the lead for this project?
Why is the what company?
The Williams.
The Williams company.
Do I have it wrong? It's W something. My brother lived in Los Osos, and now they handled that one. And it was a nightmare for everybody. So I was just wondering why they think that they.
I'll go back to that.
Okay.
Okay. There was another game back there. Thank you.
Probably way down the line, but if you have nature that planted the support trees, sort of probably the sewer line probably need. Who's responsible?
Okay.
Paying for that?
Yeah, sure. So impact planting. Call it. I'll touch on it. I don't want to be otherwise.
Guys, speaking about the vote, who is qualified or who qualifies to cast the vote?
Okay. All right. Hopefully you can read my scribbles. Any others before I start? Hopefully, mostly I'll have to figure that one out. I can answer all the rest of them without any real issues. All right, great. Okay.
Comment, are you sharing the view of heaven? Live with the online vote?
They can see part of the audience there. I just wanted to make sure people understood there are people in the room, not just me making this up.
Hi, will you share the slides?
Yeah, they're already posted. That's great. The slides are already posted on our state and district page.
Okay.
So people can look at them. Other questions before I get started? Like I said, one of those was gonna be easy. I'm not back to answer it. All right, let me go ahead and get started. So for those online, we had questions about voting. We had when will there be a vote? What percentage, what kind of votes do we need? Who votes? Something about the Williams Company, and then impacts to plantings, particularly along the sewage line. So I'll hit, like I said, I think I can touch on all those, but the one, and we'll come to that one. All right, so I like this slide just because I recognize that we've got people who are different levels within the room here. I'll get that in a minute. Some who've been here from the beginning, some who just moved here, some didn't even know we had a CSD until they got a postcard in the mail. So I like to start with this slide just to say, here's what has been going on. So way back in 1974, the area was proclaimed a special problems area because of nitrates in the groundwater. Okay, so over 50 years ago, around 2003, the county really got focused on trying to fix the problem. I don't want to suggest that they weren't looking at the problem between 1974 and 2003. They did make some steps and then stop, and then steps and then stop. But the real efforts began in 2003 when they did a septic to sewer study. And that was all over the map. It's posted out there, you can read it. In 2010, there was a wastewater management plan that was developed specific to Los Olivos. In 2016, this is interesting, there's a preliminary engineering report. So the first kind of back of the napkin, this is what it might cost, and the costs were sketched out at about $21 million. Based on the management plan, those costs, concerns about growth, and other concerns, the district formed. The focus of the district primarily is and has always been, we want to ensure as much local control over this process and what ultimately gets built as we can. So you have a district starting in 2018. We then hired a professional engineering firm. The preliminary engineering report was done by professional engineers as well, but we hired a firm to do a 30% design. Stantec did that design based on a local treatment plant somewhere in or around the district, using gravity feed collection and what's known as injection wells. We assumed incorrectly at the time that would be a cheap and appropriate way to go to get rid of things. And the costs were $47.8 million. So more than double, right? Probably a more realistic estimate with real costs than what they were seeing with the preliminary engineering report, because they've done some real design. This ties back to getting you to tell me where your septic tanks are. Much better data was gathered and had in 2021 than they had 5 years earlier. So they could actually say, oh my gosh, we've got this going on and that going on. So the costs are going to be in the area of $47.8 million. And I'm going to come back to that. You don't have to memorize that number. You'll see that again in a few minutes. We then, as a district, and this is about the time I came on board, we went to all of you and said, well, what's important to you as we start talking about building a wastewater treatment solution? What's important to you? We hired somebody who's called an assessment engineer. You're legally required to hire an assessment engineer who took that $47.8 million and broke it down parcel by parcel. Now, those were preliminary based on that number, and that spreadsheet is out there if you want a copy of it. You can find your parcel and say, oh, that's how they were going to do it. That approach at that time was solely based on lot size. That's the one thing that doesn't really change, right? You can add a bathroom, you can add a bedroom, you can expand your kitchen, but you don't usually change your lot size. So that was the basic portion of that. The board this last year talked about assessment and how to assess. A lot of the focus was shifting more of the cost toward the commercial development and less toward residential. Still some component most likely of lot size, but really focused on, the general sense, and you'll see the groundwater monitoring numbers in a few minutes. Groundwater monitoring shows that as you get toward the commercial core, it's a bigger problem than it is in the rest of the district. So focusing on shifting some of those costs there. 2023, we began looking at collection, and I'll talk briefly about each one of these, but we talked about something called effluent collection, where you still have a tank on your property, waste goes into it, it settles those solids out, and then we just push the liquid off to be treated. That's one approach. You still have something on your property. Or gravity fed collection, which is what many of us know as kind of traditional sewers, where pipe comes out of your house, goes to the street, and you're done, right? Still looking at both of those. You'll see that in a few minutes. We're still looking at both of those, primarily related to cost, although there's concerns about, well, I'll still have a tank and I have stuff I have to do with that sort of thing. So that was 23. 24, 25, through this year, we really started talking about, well, where could we put a plant in the district, and wouldn't it make more sense to go to Solvang? Historically, Solvang was not interested in having us send our waste to them. They had said no early on. They are kind of re-examining that. They've got a different city council there, and they said, no, we probably should be a regional wastewater treatment solution. They're already supporting the community of San Ynez, the city of Solvang. And they said, well, if you guys wanted to connect, we have the capacity to treat the sewage that you guys would produce. And we think it makes sense. I was talking with somebody earlier, it's kind of one of those things where the more people on a single system, right, the system costs don't change all that much, and you're sharing the cost across more people. So it gets cheaper for everybody. We hired late last year, Wallace Group, and maybe that's who you're thinking of, Wallace Group.
I said Williams.
Okay, Wallace, I could talk about that. We hired Wallace Group to do design. Now, a minute ago, I talked about we had an effluent design. A company called Regen did that design. I mentioned before that Stantec had done a different design on the gravity fed side. And the two were not consistent. The costs were not consistent. How they approached the engineering problem were not consistent. So the board said, you know what? We need to have a single group, Wallace Group, come in and kind of reconcile those two designs, make sure we're getting costs that are similar for both sides, not one set of numbers this way and another set of numbers that way. So Wallace Group is working on that right now. They're also working on something that will be a better reflection of what actual cost might be than what I presented back in May. So a 30-year cost estimate for life cycle costs for both of those collection systems. So I think that'll be good. Ultimately, that means by April, May, we'll have some much better data to tell us, okay, here's what real construction costs look like as of April, May, and here's what a 30-year outlook looks like for those two collection systems. The board and the public will then decide which way are we going to go, right? And if we can get the money to do the next step of design, we'll move whatever that decision is into final design. So at this point, I want to be really clear. There is no decision that's been made between effluent collection in the community or gravity fed. They're both still at play, and we're still looking at both of them. We did do back in May, we did do a community poll in this room. Several of you were here. I'll show you the results of that in a few minutes, but basically the community poll was highly focused on gravity fed collection and going to the city of Solvang. We're still debating at that time between, do we want to build a local treatment plant, or do we want to send waste to the city of Solvang? And out of that came a really important document. Might not seem like a big deal, but a project definition. And why is a project definition so important? Well, without a project definition, we can't go after grants. So now we have a project definition, and we're pursuing grants for the next phase of design, and we'll be pursuing grants for construction. And so that may not seem like a big deal. It's one of those bureaucratic things, but it's actually a very big deal. So it's good that we now have a project definition. All right, so ultimately, what's the issue, right? Some people still ask me this, and it's a great question, because you have to say, well, why are we even doing this to begin with, right? And I tried to simplify this down as best I could. Most properties in Los Olivos, not all of them, we do have a couple that have some of the more advanced systems, but most properties are using just traditional septic tanks. My house was built in the 80s here on Grand. It's just a traditional two-baffle side of a tank with a leach field. Most of us are using something like that. If you are using a septic tank in Los Olivos, you're contributing to the nitrate problems in the district. That's just the way it works, right? You've got a septic tank. That means you're putting some level of nitrates into the shallow groundwater table, which is ultimately why we have a problem. This document called the LAMP, the Local Area Management Plan, it's a county-wide document that says kind of, hey, who's appropriate for these traditional septic tanks and who isn't? And basically, boiled down, oversimplified, the document says, if you're on less than 2.5 acres, and we do have 14, I'll show you these numbers in a minute, We have 14 parcels in the district that are over 2.5 acres. They're really the only ones that should be on septic tanks. All the rest of us should be doing something else, and that's part of what we're discussing. What else to do? In particular for us, we have a couple of other problems. We have a lot of really small lots. Some of the lots are, you look at this lot, right? It kind of goes from about that wall and maybe 5 feet the other side of that wall into the little alley back here. The septic tank is out in the back. That's not a very big lot for the amount of usage that a big kitchen like they've got in the back here could put out, right? And 2 bathrooms that they don't use them for public, right? We don't have any public bathrooms other than the porta potties. But we have a lot of small lots. In fact, this might be considered a big lot compared to some of the lots in our district. We have a very shallow groundwater table. By very shallow, I mean, if you get down to the bridge, it was measured at 5 feet last May. So you only have to go down less than I am tall to get to the shallow groundwater table. If you think about where your leach lines are, if you've got leach lines, they're not much above 5 feet, right? And certainly if you have a dry well or a seepage pit, it goes down more than 5 feet. So the waste that comes out of your septic tank is going right into the shallow groundwater table. That last one is really interesting because we're finding out there are more lots on seepage pits and dry wells than we thought. We thought there were more people using leach lines, but there are a lot more doing that than we thought, particularly in the downtown core area and on those small lots. Just want to be clear up, kind of where we're at here. The groundwater table in this general area is probably closer to 20 feet. It's just when you get down toward the bridge where it's really shallow. Ultimately, the result is high nitrate concentrations and more because we're putting other things in. We're not a special problems area for anything other than nitrates. Although if you've been following what the state's doing, they're looking at all sorts of things like sodium and nitrates and all these other constituents that are found in the waste stream. That, for instance, that's part of what the City of Solvang is working on right now. They're upgrading their plant to address some of those other constituents that come through the waste stream. All right, so here's get rid of that. Get rid of that, maybe you can see. Yeah.
I just had a text with people on Zoom aren't seeing your slides.
They're not seeing my slides. Interesting. All right, let me try that again. Thank you for saying that. People online, if you're not seeing the slides, you can go to the district's website oops, that's the wrong one. And the slides are out there on the State of the District page. You can get to it right off the homepage. There's a set of the slides there. Let's see if I can. Let's try this again. Well, I hope that does it. Try it again. Again, if you're online, they are on the website and you can look at them. I'm just going through them. The only difference is I use what's known as builds, where you add little things as you go through the slides. You'll just see the final version. So apologies to those online. That did it? Oh, good. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, whoever that is. Thank you. So back to shallow groundwater monitoring wells. So the purple is the district, the Highway 154 is across the top there, right? Santa Barbara Avenue, the bridge is down here, Grand Avenue coming down here. So monitoring well 1 is up right at the upper left-hand corner by 154. 2 is across the way over by Refugio Ranch Winery. 3 and 4 are both right at Olivet. 1 at Santa Barbara, 1 just off of Grand, San Marcos, and then 5 is down by the bridge. As you can see here, and I realize these numbers are a little small, but I think you can probably read them. These numbers in red are over what's known as the maximum contaminant level, MCL, that's allowed. So if it's in red, that means the number's too high, right? We can't have numbers that high. So well 2, which is up in the upper right-hand corner, well 4, which came in just below MCL last time we measured it in May, at 9.9, MCL being 10. So 2 and 4 tell us, the highest concentrations are definitely kind of over in this area here on the right-hand side of the slide. So that tells us, where most of it is. The other thing I like to point out, there's a groundwater basin plan. So this is another document put together by the state and the county that says, well, what's our target? Our target is 1. So nitrate levels of 1 and the entire district is over that. It's not a legally required number to meet, but it is a target, right? The ones that are over 10, they can actually take action and force us to do things to remedy the problem. And ultimately, that's why we're a special problems area. Back in May of 24, we started measuring water depth. See, here's that 5 feet I was talking about down at Monitoring Well 5. And it's gone from 10 to 8 to 5. It's pretty shallow. That's pretty shallow. The others are in the 20s and maybe 30s, as you can see here. Importantly, water flows sort of north to south in this, right? When you look at what's happening below surface ground, it is higher up by 154 than it is down by the bridge, right? So it kind of makes sense that water would flow that way, which means any nitrates and leachates are flowing that direction as well. Well, they can see, but I can't move a slide. There we go. All right, so this slightly different view of the picture, or picture of the district rather. The blue line is the outline of the district. You can see where the different lots are. The ones in red, and I'm sorry, I don't think this takes account for anybody that might have color issues. The red ones are the really, really small lots, meaning they're less than 1/4 of an acre. The green ones are less than half an acre. The kind of purplish ones are less than 3/4 of an acre, and everything else is bigger than that. So again, I was talking about those small lots, and you can see up in the area where we have some of those problems is where some of the smallest lots are right here. The commercial district is also up there. 384 parcels. Now, I want to be really clear. Some of those parcels are not buildable parcels. They're abandoned roads, that sort of thing. Often those have been attached to an existing parcel. So somebody might have 2 parcels, but one of them's an old abandoned road, right? So it's not really buildable in that sense. But that's how many there are in the district. About 46 of them are commercially zoned. And I say about because those numbers shift around when people change things, or like with Maddie's, they joined some parcels together to make one parcel. And the remainder, 338, are residential. Just by way of a data point, our annual budget is about $250,000. And that number, I'm going to talk about it here in a minute, because what we're trying to accomplish takes millions of dollars, and you can't get there very quickly with $250,000 a year, right? I mentioned I'd talk about lot sizes. So here's a breakdown of the 384 parcels, 2.5 acres or above. We've got 14. So those 14 could arguably be on septic tanks. All of the rest shouldn't be. And you can see how they break down. I'm in this big group of 108 there that are between 1/4 and 1/2 acre personally. And, between that and the really small ones, that's the bulk of the lots right there. All right, so many of you have seen this slide so many times, you're probably tired of seeing it, but I think it's really helpful to remind us what we're trying to do here, right? Regardless of what you're doing from a wastewater treatment and processing perspective, you're doing these 3 things. It doesn't matter if you're the smallest lot with the smallest septic tank, or you're the city of LA. You're doing these 3 things. You're collecting the waste through some sort of pipes that come out of your house. You're treating them, whether it's in a septic tank or a massive wastewater treatment plant like they have in LA, and you're disposing of the liquid that's left, right? In our case, for septic tanks, it's a leach field, a dry well, or a seepage pit. In LA, they have ponds and chambers and everything else. So you're doing those 3 things no matter what you're doing from a wastewater perspective. We are looking right now at gravity, effluent, or maybe a mix of those. And there's still a good argument potentially about a mix of those. From a treatment perspective, our project is focused on treating, having the City of Solvang treat for us, and disposal will be at the City of Solvang. They already have ponds in Solvang. For those who don't know, the Solvang treatment plant, if you go across the long bridge just south of the golf course, it's kind of on the right-hand side there. It's just across the bridge. You can't see it. I don't know if you lived in those houses. I did when I first moved up here 30 plus years ago. I never smelled it, but it's there. It's been there all along. So pictures are also good. So, you have a source like a house, collection, some sort of treatment, disposal. in our case, if you look at how that would shake out with the project we're talking about, we would collect inside the district, right? We would have a force main that goes through the unincorporated area, basically down Alamo Potato, and connects to the city of Solvang down by the park. This line, and I'm going to talk about that some more, that force main is something the district would own. And we've talked a lot about this, and it's really important because there's a lot of very well-founded concern about growth along Alamo Potato. The district would own that line. Nobody, not the state, not the county, not the LAFCO, nobody could force us to allow somebody to connect. So if we said no, nobody can connect. Okay, so that is one of the barriers for helping to prevent our efforts, helping to prevent construction along Alamo Potato. Now, the county could certainly propose growth along that, and houses could build their own line. They could do all sorts of things, but our line wouldn't be supportive of the construction along Alamo Potato. The other thing that's important to note is, much like the community of Santa Ynez did, we're going to have a contract with the city of Solvang, and it's going to be for a certain amount of effluent, right? It's what we produce or what we're projected to produce. So in order for us to have somebody else connect in, we'd have to renegotiate that contract, and there'd be all sorts of kind of interesting things about, are they in the district, are they out of the district? So good news is we're talking about avoiding that whole problem by having our own line. We own it, we control it, we manage it, we connect to the city of Solvang, and nobody else connects to our pipe. Okay. I drew this the way I did to say, this is the stuff that's going on in the district. This on the left here, we're going through the county, and then the rest of it all happens within city boundaries there on the right-hand side of the slide. This is kind of another picture of what it really would look like, right? So that's the district up there on the right-hand side, collecting using gravity-fed effluent or both. A force main that goes down Alamo Potato. Down here, we connect near Sunnyfield Park. It takes kind of a circuitous route eventually to get across the creek to the treatment plant over on the other side of the river there. So that's the project that we're looking at. The district would build and own everything from this point up to the top. This already exists for the city, so we wouldn't have to do anything there. So just a little bit more about the city of Solvang. So they too use gravity collection within the city. So once we connected at by the park there, it would flow via gravity to their treatment plant. They have a treatment plant called a sequencing batch reactor. It's one of the well-known long-term use types of treatment plants. They dispose using something called percolation ponds. For those who attended the disposal discussion years ago, we talked about different ways to dispose of the liquid. They use ponds. It's effective. If you're not worried about sight lines or anything like that, it's really effective. Their capacity is 1.5 million gallons per day. Santa Ynez CSD has rights to about 0.3 million gallons per day, so 300,000 gallons. We'd be half of that, maybe a little more than half of that is what our contract would be, because we're a smaller community than Santa Ynez. So if you go back to 2023, we asked everybody, well, what's important to you? And this was the prioritized list of what you all said was important to you. Cost, both for operations as well as construction. No surprise, right? Location, remember we were talking at the time about building our own plant. So that was highly focused on where would you put a plant. Ownership and maintenance responsibility. This is one that's still a little bit open, and as I build through the slide, you'll see it, because this really had to do with if we use effluent tanks and they're on somebody's private property, who's going to be responsible for owning and maintaining those tanks on private property? Kind of an interesting conversation. Potential for growth. I think that's, something we're all still concerned about. And, I'm going to sidebar here for 10 seconds. If we build a local plant or we connect to Solvang within our community, the potential for growth is identical. People need to understand that. By building a local plant, it doesn't somehow eliminate some potential for growth that connecting to Solvang creates. Because the same folks that regulate the city of Solvang would regulate us. And essentially what they say is when your plant gets to some capacity, usually in the 75% level of capacity, they say, okay, time for you to upgrade that plant. Because they want to make sure that that's not a hindrance to growth. And these other things are forever wanting by tightening some of the regulations. So it's really important, I think, for people to understand that. I've never seen a situation where this plant over that plant versus connecting that plant somehow is a growth control. Okay.
But I think what you're missing is the fact it's the Alamo Pintado corridor.
Yeah, and I think we've addressed that.
Versus.
Yeah. Totally, understood, totally. But I think our force main addresses that because nobody can connect. So if you can't connect, well, then there's no growth that we've induced. There may be growth there anyway. There's constantly construction going on through there, but agreed, totally. And one of the things that we've been really focused on is, as we talk about that force main going, how do we lock it down from a legal perspective to make sure that that absolutely cannot happen? And so we're working on that. And there's some other options we think we can add kind of further restrictions to that to help address that. Go ahead, yeah.
What the influx of tourists we've seen
So
just a few years,
yeah, for sure.
wine tasting rooms. So if that continues to grow and there's more usage, then does the cost go up?
Yeah, so for those online, you may not have heard either of those questions. I'm going to repeat it. So the question, this latest one was, well, what about growth from tourism during the day in particular, right? I mean, I live pretty close to downtown, just here on Grand. And believe me, I hear the bands and I see people end up parking in front of my house on weekends. So I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so again, it doesn't matter what kind of treatment plant you implement, they're both going to have that same impact. Now, tourism's a whole different issue, right? Will having bathrooms in tasting rooms create more tourism? I don't know. I think St. Mark's is shutting down their restroom. I don't know if you all knew that. They are shutting theirs down because they can no longer afford the bus loads that literally pull up in front of the church, get out and go in and use the restroom and then drive away. So they're shutting it down. It's unfortunate because I think it was a very nice thing the church was doing, but believe me, I get it. I've been over there and I've watched that happen. So I don't have a good answer for you. That's it should, yeah. And I think another flip side of that, and I'm not afraid to bring these up, is well, okay, so if you add a sewer, does that mean that you're going to price people out? They're going to have to build something that they don't want to have to build otherwise, right? So I think those are all valid concerns and part of what the board has been grappling with in board meetings, and something that I think we need to keep raising because I think it's important, not just to you. There's a lot of us that care about that. Believe me. Again, I don't want to get too far into stories, but I've been here over 30 years. I've seen a little bit of change. There was a gas station here when I moved in, and it's not there anymore, right? There was one winery, right? Are there 30 now? I don't even know how many there are now, but there's probably 30. So yeah, and it was a very much more quiet town, but Solvang's changed a lot. San Diego's changed a lot. I think we've seen more than our fair share within the valley, but yeah, it's something I too am concerned about. Going back to this then, so treatment plant, the footprint and the size of the plant, potential for odors, when waste sits around for any period of time, it starts to stink, right? So there was concerns about odors. View shed impact is mostly about the ponds, kind of a question. If you have big ponds or you have a big building, that's a treatment plant, you impact your sheds. And then there were a lot of folks that said, we need to not set aside innovation. Let's make sure we're considering newer ways of doing things opposed to, going back to what's always been done. I would submit that at least those four, by connecting to Solvang, pretty much come off the table. The location is decided. It's Solvang. The treatment plant is built. There's no new treatment plant. The size of it is done. The potential for odor, it's the same as what they have today. And we don't, wouldn't see any here locally. And the view shed impacts are essentially the same as well. It all happens in Solvang. It's already happening in Solvang. So to me, those are positive things with the approach we're currently examining. So we can talk about that one as well. So in May, I talked about the fact that we had a little workshop. And we asked people what do they want, and we allowed them to weight their votes and do some other things. This was how people voted. On the collection side, most people said gravity fed, but there was a decent number that said effluent, right? Some said a mix, and some said, well, I just need more information. I still don't know enough to be able to they give you a proper vote. On the treatment and disposal side, I think it was a little clearer. City of Solvang was a much clearer kind of vote, even though the numbers were somewhat similar. Just the room was much clearer about that, I thought. And on local, at the time, we spent a little time looking at, you know, if we didn't want to build something in the district, could we build it at Dunn? And we had conversations with Dunn about could they host a treatment plant? What would that look like? And we did some initial costing on that. In the end, the community said, let's stay focused on the City of Solvang. You got to make decisions at some point. So this was costs that we put together at the time. As of May, this is important. So construction costs, you can see here local, and local was an in-district solution with what's known as a membrane bioreactor, MBR treatment plant, and percolation chambers, which is a different way to dispose of things. It's basically underground, so you don't see anything, so you don't have a big pond anywhere. So local, effluent only, was 46.7 million to construct. Hybrid, meaning a little bit of both, was 50 million, and gravity was 53. Going to Solvang, as you can see, cost went down, let's just call it $8 million across the board, right, for each one of those, somewhere between 7 and 8. Operations and maintenance, these were a little rougher numbers, and this is what I'm anxious to see Wallace Group kind of give us a better estimate of. Local, you can see the numbers there, 500,000 for effluent or hybrid, a little cheaper for gravity fed, and Solvang, you know, the numbers just go down because again, we're part of a shared system there. So costs are a little cheaper. So what's happening now? Maybe I can address your question now, since it's not the Williams Group, it's the Wallace Group. So we hired Wallace Group. We had, I'm drawing a blank. I think we had 7 in the end responses to a request for proposals related to doing the work that the Wallace Group was ultimately hired to do. They were all over the map. Some were 4 times as much as what the Wallace Groups were. One was a little cheaper. So we selected Wallace Group based on kind of the totality of what they offered. Wallace Group is a company primarily out of San Luis Obispo. They've done sewers like this before. They've done effluent kind of sewers. They've done pressurized systems and non-pressurized systems. So right now, remember I said we had the Stantec gravity fed design and the regen effluent design. They're in the process of reconciling those and making sure that we have as accurate data as possible. And they're going to get us those 30-year life cycle costs, which I think is really important because sometimes something's cheaper to build, but it's more expensive to maintain, right? And you want to make sure we get the right mix of that because costs matter over time, not just the construction time. Sometime in early 2026, I think April, we will get their first design package. And from that, we'll be able to make a decision. Okay, how are we going to collect in the community? At some point, we've got to decide, right? Will it be gravity? Will it be effluent? Or will it be a mix? For those who say, why aren't we just doing gravity? I think that's a completely fair question based on the slide a couple ago. Given that we have a creek that runs down the middle of things, it may be significantly cheaper to do, for instance, maybe I'll call it the west side of the creek over here, right? With effluent and just push it someplace as opposed to having to cross that creek multiple times, as it does divide the community a little bit. So there may be some scenarios where having some portion of the district on effluent makes some sense, both for those homeowners as well as for the district as a whole from a cost perspective. Don't know yet. That's what Wallace Group is looking at to try and help us understand, is there a better mix? Unlikely, for instance, that we would put the commercial core on effluent systems. Having a tank, they're already going to have to do fat, oil, and grease separation. If you've ever been in a restaurant, you know what the grease traps look like in a restaurant. They're not pretty. They're already going to have to do all that. So I'm pretty sure that gravity is going to make sense in the commercial core. But Wallace Group may say, "Guy, you're out of your mind. Effluent makes more sense." I don't think they will, but it's always a possibility. Important thing about this, let me go back to it, is sometime April, let's call it, we're going to make a decision as a community, which way are we going to go? And then we're going to work toward final design with that solution. So we're kind of step forward, step forward, step forward. Here's some of the questions now. Here's the first one I get to tick off. I got it in the presentation. We're working right now on a Proposition 218 vote, and I'll describe what that is briefly, in late 2026, so about a year from now. It doesn't follow the election cycle, let me be clear. It's its whole own thing, right? Property owners vote, so that's who votes, and it's a weighted vote. So if you're gonna be paying more for construction, for instance, your vote will weigh more than somebody who's paying less. So it's a weighted vote. All right, and then we have to have, like in any majority vote, of the weighted votes, 50 plus 1% has to say, let's do this, not something less. Yes, Megan?
And how do we know who's gonna have to?
We will go through, remember I talked earlier about an assessment engineer? We have to hire an assessment engineer to do that calculation. So every property owner will have something and say, well, I would pay, $48,033. Somebody else will say, well, their number's bigger than that, whatever it is, right? So that's why an assessment engineer is important, because they have to actually stamp that and say, I've looked at this 16 ways Sunday, it's accurate, I've taken the costs, I've allocated them the way the board has said. Here's your piece. If you vote yes, that's what you're signing up to pay for. So we did that once before, just on lot size. The board's been talking about it again, about, the heavier problem seems to be with commercial area. Let's make sure that they're paying their fair share and that residential owners aren't supplementing the businesses. Worst case is that slides into early 2027. But I don't think it'll go much further than that. Now, there is one thing I'll say that could push that out. If when we get to the design question about how to collect, some people might say, I really want more data before I can make an accurate vote. We will have that conversation, I can guarantee you. For my purposes and the time that I've been through this before, I worked for San Luis County, and if anybody knows about Los Osos and the mess that went on up there, I was on the outside of that looking in, but saw enough of it to have learned a few things before the county up there ended up taking over Los Osos. So people will always say, I want more data, I want more data, I want more data. At some point, you do have to make some decisions, and at some point, we are going to vote. Will there always be more data to be had? Yes, there will. But I suspect we're talking late 26, maybe early 27. Now, little sidebar here, and City of Solvang, if you're listening, don't throw rocks at me. We met with the City of Solvang the other day because they're in the midst of an upgrade to their plant. One of our design documents said, because we looked at their capacity and the projects they're working on, said, don't connect to the City of Solvang until they're finished with what they're calling phase 2 of their upgrade. Phase 2 of their upgrade is looking at kind of 2029 now. So it's been pushed out a couple of years. So if we voted in 2026, that means that we're still not going to have construction done until 2029 because there's no place to connect to on the other end, right? Mike?
Will that still meet the requirements of the county?
Yeah, and so the question is, will that meet the requirements of the county? It's not really the county, it's the water board. State agency is the one that's telling us what we have to do. And I think that's a good segue though, and reminder that what happens if the 218 fails, often if it's close, if it's 48-52 against, well, you might see if there's something you can do to change that 4%, to get to a 51-49 cutting in favor. But if it's 25-4 and 75 against, the district will fold and the problem goes back to the county, and the county will make the decision for us. There'll still be a 218 in there, but the county will be running the project. There'll be, we'll probably be what's known as service area as opposed to a special community services district, which is what happened in San Luis Obispo County with Los Osos. Los Osos community tried to do it a number of times. They had different issues, but ultimately they failed. The problem went back to the county, and the county built a treatment plant for the community of Los Osos, which is a much bigger community than us, but it went back to the county and they did it. Yeah.
In that scenario.
Yeah.
Is the county looking at residents for input, or is it like being told what to do?
They will still look for input, but I will say it's kind of like it's a much faster moving train. And trying to jump on it can be a little more difficult. The county will have meetings. We have a lot of input. People don't realize how much you get to see about what's really happening with, when, for instance, when we put out an RFP, It would get posted on a site with the county and you might not even know, right? So we've got a lot of input right now. That's the beauty of having our own community services district. The county will still ask for input. Let me be really clear about that, but it'll be weighed out in a way that, you know,
So is it fair to say, no matter what happens, we're getting sewers, taking time aside?
we are headed toward a sewer, yes. The special problem designation isn't going away.
Right.
Those red numbers aren't going away on their own.
So it's just a timing issue.
Yeah, it's a timing. I would, the other thing that I would draw people's attention to is there's a document that I posted. We've got on the website, there's a page for studies and other documents. The state agency that I was referring to a minute ago did say, hey, here's some of the things we would consider if you guys aren't successful. And some of them are kind of draconian, things that as a property owner here on Grand Avenue, I don't want to have to deal with. So I'd rather personally see us get to a solution that makes sense.
We would lose ownership of that.
The county would own it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a particular problem there. Yeah, did you have a question?
But now, let's say we get all through this and now there's an assessment. You talked about the annual assessment. Is it a separate assessment from your property tax bill?
So for those online, is the assessment that we would have for construction a separate one from your property tax? It's much like when you see a school bond on your property tax today, it would come at the same time as your property tax bill, as part of your property tax bill. But you'll be able to see clearly, whatever your portion is as a line item. Does that answer your question?
Is it?
Yeah, so it's part of your property tax bill.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go over here and then I'll come back.
Thinking about this.
Yes. So there's a couple of questions in there, but go ahead, yeah. 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 So. Yeah, so I see 3 points in that question, so I'll try and hit them all. So the question was really about, if you ended up with effluent tanks on the east side of the river, the creek rather, versus the west side, and costs are going to be different, what's going on. So let's talk about the 3 things I heard in that. First one is, people have septic tanks today. Odds are their septic tank would have to be removed and a new tank put in. They'll also need things like electrical power to their septic tank, which they don't have today in most cases. Because there'll be a pump then that pushes things out. So they'll see significant change as well. Everybody will see change. It's just, and they will have longer term, some maintenance that those that are on gravity fed won't, right? Because gravity fed is just a pipe that you have to auger out every 40 or 50 years, I don't know, to get the tree lines out. So they'll have maintenance they'll have to do regularly, get it pumped like we should with our septic tanks every few years. The third bit in that is, we will, they often define what we call or loosely term as benefit zones. So the benefit to somebody who's on an effluent system is different than the benefit to somebody who's on a gravity fed system, right? Because you've got different overhead, different requirements and all that. So we will probably define some sort of benefit zone that will not only talk about, the construction costs, but also the ongoing operations and maintenance costs. And that goes back to that bull about who owns and maintains those darn things, right? Because if the district owns them, there's a lot more maintenance on a effluent system than there is on gravity fed, right? So we'll get to that once we've decided, or as we get into the conversation about effluent versus gravity. That's, yeah, when we've looked at it and when I've talked to different people about it, because there are fewer lots and you could, remember I said things go north to south, you could push it up to the bridge right behind us over here, right by St. Mark's, and then come back down Grand with everybody else and just have one lift station. There's lots of reasons why, from an engineering perspective, I'm not an engineer, let me be clear, but when you talk to the engineers, they say, there could be a case for doing that. Or just put everybody on gravity fed, or just put everybody on effluent except for the commercial zone. So that's all part of the conversation that will come up in the spring. I'm going to take this opportunity, hold on for me, Steve, hold that question, to answer your other question about trees and foliage and everything else. So if I go back real quick to this slide, this one, Yeah, that's probably as good as any of them. I'll go to this one. So if your house, we're gonna go down public right of way with the sewer mains, right? So, if you built something in the public right of way, it could get torn up, right? It's in the public right of way, so depending upon what it is, it may or may not get replaced. I mean, if you put a 4x4 railroad tie out there, yeah, probably pretty easy to replace, right? If an oak tree's grown in the right of way, oak trees, probably shouldn't talk about oak trees, that's a different story. But if there's a shrubbery that's been put out there, yeah, it could get torn out. It's in the public right of way, and that's where we will be with the sewer mains. I think the bigger concern people have. Correct. Yes, the district will put that in, yeah. I think the bigger concern that I've heard in the past is actually on your personal property, right? You've got a septic tank, you've got a leach line, you've got a line that's eventually gonna go to the street. That work has to be done, and more than likely, the homeowner will be responsible for that. So if you wanna go around your cat's cemetery, okay, fine. If you've got a beautiful oak tree or rose, bushes that you've put in over time, you wanna make sure you get, that'll be up to you to make sure that happens the way you wanna see it happen. Those costs, of course, will be borne by the homeowner. So there's a lot of little nuance in there, right? The other question that then people say, well, if I'm getting rid of my septic tank, do I have to take it out? And the short answer is no, you don't. There are ways to abandon your septic tank in place. Basically, most of them are concrete, not all, but most of them are concrete. You break holes in the bottom, you fill it with gravel, and you're done. And you can just leave it there. So you don't have to tear everything out that's grown over the top of it, or where that deck's encroached over the top of your septic tank, you can leave the deck, that sort of stuff. So lots of those little things that people are forever asking me, and those are some of the questions I get on a regular basis. Steve, you had a question?
Can you go back to the timeline last?
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm looking at this thing, wow, at what point would you approach the state to try to get a bond measure? Because it looks like to me that this could go way out to. It's gonna be one of the, you can't really approach the state until, of course, we come up with a decision about what we're gonna do. And have all the assessments done.
Yeah, so the question in the room here is about funding and timing of that. I've spoken to bond counsel. So there, in our most likely scenarios, there's one of two, right? As you're describing, a good old fashioned bond that the district gets. Lots of nuance in getting bonds. We don't have a credit report. We don't have a credit rating. Can we get the county to help us with that? Don't know, probably not, maybe. Be better if they did, because they have, billions of dollars of assets. We have no assets. So getting bonds can be tricky and expensive, but it's fast, interestingly enough. It is a 10-week process. If you say, I'm going to build infrastructure in the United States, you can get bonds for it. It's just a question of what interest rate you're going to pay. And it is like a 10-week process. You can make it happen. The alternative to that, which is probably going to be financially more attractive to us, and I talk to these people regularly as well, and that's something called the iBank, Infrastructure Bank. It's a bank at the state of California, and when we vote for bonds at the state level, $50 billion for infrastructure, they put that money into a bucket, right? A bank of their own, and you work with the iBank, and they loan you that money essentially out of the iBank. Terms tend to be a little better, process is a little longer, but the terms tend to be a little better, particularly for a small agency like ours. I've used both in my history at County of San Luis. I suspect we're headed toward the latter, not bonds, toward the iBank or a similar one. The other thing that's interesting in there is we're going to be pursuing grants. And grants is an interesting thing as well, because it's like the grants people say, well, show us your funding. And the funding people say, show us your grants. And so you're in this cycle of, well, do we get the funding first and then go after grants? Can we get some grants and then funding? And we don't have, billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of assets that we can just leverage in a way that somebody like the county or a city could. So it's an interesting dance. But I don't think the process length will be the problem. The problem will be timing. And to your point, how do we navigate that in the way that's most financially advantageous to the people that are ultimately gonna pay the bill, right? So, good question. Sure.
Is that something that worked out prior to the vote?
Most of it, yeah. So the question was, is that something that will be worked out prior to the vote? We will have a good sense of which way are we going to go. But interest rates fluctuate, right? I think the important question that people want to know is how much of this am I paying and how much are we getting in grants, right? And grants are a tricky thing because until you're ready to start, they won't give you a grant. So that's why I say it's a circular thing. It's like, well, I want to have grants. Well, what do you want to do for your project? It's a $35 million sewer project. Okay, great. We'll give you 10% of that. Well, when are you gonna get started? And so it's that sort of thing. So we will have a good sense of it, but until we start the project and we're ready to accept a grant and start construction, that'll be a little loose. So you should have a good sense at the vote time, but you won't know the final answer. I don't want you to walk out here and go, oh, no. No, you won't. We're gonna try and get every penny we can in grants, but we're gonna have a good conversation about how much of that do we want to ensure we get, how much, so that'll be a conversation at a board meeting coming up sometime early next year. Please.
Okay, what will be the fiscal responsibility of those 14 parcels that are larger than 2 and we're right outside of the district? I happen to live below the grammar school, which definitely needs the help. But I have 4.5 acres.
So I'm going to try it this way, and maybe this will answer your question, maybe it won't. If it doesn't, make me give you an answer. So the expectation is the 384 parcels that are part of the district will participate in a sewer solution. If you're outside the district, you're outside the district.
So it's only those people that
are inside that.
Inside that
box, yeah. So when the district was formed, it was interesting. The district was originally proposed to be actually quite a bit bigger. It went north of 154 because the special problems area is actually bigger than the district. And through the formation process, it was shrunk down to what it is. So that is what will be we're designing a solution for. And everybody will participate. Right now, we give St. Mark's and some others that they're not paying the annual fee. There's like 7, I think, that aren't. Everybody else is paying it. So there are some that aren't today, but they will be when we have a sewer. Everybody will participate.
Even the ones that are generally outside the district.
If they're outside the district, they're outside the district. They're not included. But regardless of size, if they're in the district, they will participate. And how they participate is still up for debate when we get to that whole assessment discussion. So if you're purely a residential lot, it's a lot easier conversation, right? Whereas if you're a residential lot today that's zoned commercial or residential use today that's zoned commercial, well, that's kind of an interesting one, right? We've got a number of those lots in town. So in different size lots, and that's that whole assessment conversation. And so we're going to have that early next year as well, continue that conversation. So make sure you weigh in and people understand what your feelings are about it, for sure. Is there another question over here? No. Okay. I'm getting close to done. Now I'm done. No. No, so these are great questions. The board and our community, we still have some tough decisions to make. Let's be really clear about that. We haven't decided how to collect. Some people are fervent about one solution or the other. And I love that. I think that's great. That's part of public discourse, right? We have a good conversation about it. Maybe I don't get what I want, but as long as I've had a chance to say my piece and be heard, okay, I've done my part. And that's one of the things I like about holding this meeting, because it gives a little less formal, right? Have the whole board meeting and that whole, you get 3 minutes and that's it, sit down. Happy to answer questions here. There are other opportunities to get your questions answered. First and third Friday of every month, we've got a board member over at Lefty's Coffee from about 8:30 in the morning, just sitting there, waiting for somebody to come by and talk to them. So go by and talk to them. Reach out to me via one of these things, email, call. I'll have coffee with you. I might have something like over at Fig with you too. And we'll talk about sewers. Point is, I do this for one reason. I'm basically retired from the county because I care about our community and I want to make sure that we get a solution that we all agree on. Will everybody be 100% satisfied? The answer is no, right? It just doesn't work that way. When you've got 384 parcels trying to come to a single agreement, it's just not going to work that. Will you get most of what you want? Well, I hope so. I really do hope so. And the best way to make sure that you do is to show up to meetings, right? Or if you can't show up to meetings, I post them all on YouTube now, not on our website. They're on YouTube. You can go out and look, so you don't have to attend the meeting. If you have questions or you just want to make a statement, you can send it to me and I'll make sure the board gets it. I get several of those a year as well, where somebody says, I think you should just be doing this, that, or the other. And I say, board, here's somebody who says they think we should just be doing this, that, or the other. Please.
Meeting someone who wasn't able to attend, watch that later.
I will post it tomorrow. Yes, I generally try and post them within 24 hours. I don't always make it. But yeah, they're generally posted within 24 hours. And if you go to the page that the meeting was kicked off from, there's a link to our YouTube right there. So you can just click to the YouTube and watch it. Hopefully I've answered, well, I misspelled. Did I get all the questions? If you have questions that I didn't get to, packs a plan, Wallace group, who votes, number of votes, question. Yeah, so I got to those. That's good. Again, I think that I'll speak for myself and I think I can speak for the board on this. We're a small community. There are 5 board members that you guys all vote for. Any one of them, I'm sure, would sit down with you at any time, just so you can talk to them and get their perspective on it. I report to the 5 of them, right? So I have this struggle sometimes about, no, I'm a resident. No, I'm the general manager. No, I'm a resident. No, I'm the general manager. When I'm here working on this, I'm the general manager. So I do what the 5 or a majority of the 5 of them say. But doesn't mean I don't have my own opinions too. So I think that's fair. But I'm happy to share whatever information I have with you at any time. I try and post everything that I think is germane somewhere on our website. Again, I think when I look at, for instance, what happened with the county as it relates to Los Osos and some other sewers that I've seen built, there's a lot of information readily available to you on our website that in a lot of those cases would never have been made available. So highly encourage you to show up and ask questions. Stuart.
Are you taking suggestions as well?
Please.
This has been one of the better meetings because of the ability to have interaction and the fact that you've summarized things very clearly. The board meetings are extremely frustrating because of this lack of interaction.
Yeah, the Brown Act.
I would encourage you to do this more frequently.
Okay.
As we get closer, because as you know, there's a lot of fake news out there.
Yeah.
About this process that people need to be straightened up about.
For sure. And thank you. That actually triggers something in my mind. I appreciate the recommendation to do this more often. I will say one of the other contracts that was recently approved was somebody to help us with outbound communications. Regional Government Services does that sort of thing professionally. One of the first things I'm tasking them with is what they call a learner video that will, through pictures and words, help people understand what's the problem and what are we trying to do and why are we trying to fix it. Learner videos are often referred to as something, that are targeted at the 4th to 6th grade kind of level. But I'll tell you what, I've learned more from learner videos just by going out and trying to learn things myself. So although it's targeted at basics, you can learn a ton by just making sure you really understand those basics because it's helpful. So that's one of the first things I'm going to be doing, and we'll be pushing those out via. They're much better at social media than I am, so they'll be helping me get those out through those mechanisms as well. But yeah, happy to hold those more often. Yeah. Hi.
I'm still monitoring wells.
Are we still monitoring the wells? So we were supposed to take a sample in November. At the November meeting, the board said, hold on a minute. How much money do we want to be spending making sure we still have a problem versus trying to fix a problem? I've spoken since then. I've spoken to the water board who does want us to continue. I've spoken to our water waste, the people that do the sampling, who've said, yeah, you guys really should do it for at least a couple more years to get good data. As my statistics teacher used to tell me, one data point doesn't make a trend, right? You need several data points to understand trends. And they're saying, GSI is saying, you don't quite have enough data points yet to be sure you have the right trends. The board's gonna talk about that next Wednesday at their board meeting, and I suspect we're going to continue. But we may only do it once a year, who knows? But I think we'll continue to do it at some level. Unfortunately, we've been trying to find some grants specifically tied to doing testing and monitoring. I haven't been successful yet. I haven't given up, but I haven't been successful yet. And you know, it's nearly 10% of our budget just to do the testing. Remember, I said we've only got a budget of $250,000. We need $1 million to finish, another $1 million to finish the design work. And every $10,000 helps. So
Talk to Salute because he just got $1 million for Solvang, but it always.
yeah, I put in a mail to Johanna just the other day when I heard that. So yes, we're poking at them as well. Thank you for the question. Yes, please.
Curious, guy, why, you mentioned that, special problems area is a larger area.
Yeah, so the question for those online, the question was that I had mentioned that the special problems area is larger than the district. Why was the district formed the way it was? I wasn't part of the formation process, so unfortunately I can't tell you. I will tell you one thing though, from experience in the past. I understand why they cut the stuff north of 154 off. Because anytime you want to try and go across a state highway, it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. It's worse than going across rivers and creeks. So I can understand that. And that's mostly, in fact, almost entirely large lots, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 acres kinds of things. So I can kind of understand that one. When we get down, you know, for instance, just south of the bridge along Elm Pintado, there's a couple houses, the lavender, not lavender, what's the guy that just put in the Airstreams? The olive guy, yeah, behind the olive guy. You know, those houses are on smaller lots. They're part of the special problems area. Why they cut it off right there? I don't know. Maybe it was just the way the streets come together and they said, you know, this is a good place to end it because it's clear, you know, and they do that sometimes. They say, you know, here's some clear lines about where things are and where they aren't. The other thing I know they considered was topology. You know, if you're way high or way low compared to everybody else, that can be problematic for a sewer. So I'm sure they considered that, but I can't tell you why they drew the boundaries they drew. I wasn't part of the formation.
If anyone outside the area wanted to look up at a later time, it would be.
The district would have to change its boundaries, and I don't see us doing that. I just don't see us doing that. Yeah, I just don't see us doing that. I won't say never, but I don't see us doing it. I can say for certain, because I've heard it probably 5 or 6 times now, the county would have loved to have seen those houses I was just talking about a minute ago, the first few on Alamo Potato, but not quite to Ballard, you know, but close to us as part of the district. And I've basically said, outside of our scope, outside of our problem, we're focused on us at this point. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of, as much as they'd like to see it included, push to include it. I think there's probably going to be some folks that, you know, we're talking about larger lots that say, hey, why am I in here? Can't I get out? And there's a process for that. So we'll see where that goes. But it's not all 14 of the ones that are over 2.5 acres. It's probably 2 or 3. Steve.
Yeah, I'm just thinking to myself, I thought it was very interesting what you showed earlier, is that, you know, the water runs south. And I was thinking that, are there any monitoring wells like Ballard or further down that are kind of verifying our issue? We're transmitting these nitrates down.
Yeah, so for those online, the question is, what other monitoring wells essentially are there as you go down? There is not a network that is as dense as what we've got in the district anywhere nearby. There's 1 or 2 kind of up, let me get my streets right, up Fig. If you get over by the old dump, there's a bunch because they're monitoring what's leaching out of the dump, and that's not making it to us. What's between us and Solvang? I don't recall the map that I saw seeing a well until you got basically into the city of Solvang. Yeah, our map, you know, I'll go back to that real quick. Our map, you know, it does show that the worst is up there in the upper right, right? And as you come down, 135, you know, or I'm sorry, 245, 12, 99, by the time you get here, it's 43. So, you know, it does show that it lessens. You get south of us, past the lots we've just been kind of kicking around here, and then south of Ballard, and you're back into larger lots, so presumably it would dissipate more. Presumably, but everything that we do in the shallow groundwater table eventually makes its way down, right? That doesn't get filtered by rock and dirt and soil. It's an interesting question.
So. Something. Maybe nitrates really.
Yeah, well, and you get into the city of Solvang, they're on a sewer, so they're not doing this. There's some historical data, and maybe this is part of what you're kind of hinting at. There's some historical data, but that data is a little skewed because we used to put nitrates on crops pretty heavily, right? And so if you were north of 154, way up 150, you'd see like 30 or 40 on a sample as opposed to 10. And that's because they're putting nitrates directly on the ground. Other questions? These are great. All right, let me close with, I'm going to be here for a little while. I'm happy to answer a question privately if you weren't comfortable saying it. Please email me, call me, go to coffee on Friday, show up at our meetings. And Stuart, thank you for the suggestion. I'll think about maybe doing this twice a year, at least. And particularly as we get close to some of those big decisions, yeah. Yep. All right, great. Thanks, all right. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice night and enjoy your holidays.